Hello everyone, welcome to my channel once again. It's great to have you guys here. You'll be wondering what's going on. This guy's video is looking cool. It's looking nice. Yeah, it is looking nice and it's getting better. And this is because I actually had to do some research on softwares online and I stumbled upon a nice one and I had to do some tricks as well to get it to have this output. But don't worry, I'm gonna show you in a video later. But for now, let's focus on the journey, of the basic, the key tools you need as a software engineer. The last video we covered IDE. For those of you who missed it, please go watch that video. It's very crucial. And this video is going to be focusing on database. Database. You might be wondering, like, what is a database? Why do I need a database? So basically, there are cases where you need to store large amount of data or even small amount of data that your application need. And for some reason, you might not be able to store it within your application. You can't store it within HTML or your JavaScript. And you're wondering, like, how do I do this? So basically, you need a database to store this information. And I'll give you an example. An example would be you have a system where you have users, that have to log in into your system. You have to store those information somewhere, like their username, their password. That has to be stored somewhere, because without that, your application will not be able to understand or remember who they are. So see database as a way of persisting information. Where do you persist information? So that when someone comes back onto your system or onto your website or onto your mobile app, how would they be able to continue their interaction? An example is Facebook. There you can just upload your images. You can put a post there, people like it. So those things are actually being stored somewhere. It's stored in a database. And we have different types of database. We have the relational database. We have the non-relational database. We call that NoSQL. But in this video, I'm just going to be touching on the relational database, which is the MSSQL, the Microsoft SQL database, which is basically created by Microsoft. And before I move further, I just want to mention to you guys that I'm a Microsoft certified professional developer, and I've gained years of experience developing different application systems using Microsoft technologies. So I will be showing you most of that, and also I'll also show you things on Google Cloud, show you things on AWS platforms. But for now, I'm just going to be focusing on the Microsoft technologies. So please bear with me. And in this video, we're going to be looking at database, like I mentioned earlier. And you'll be wondering, like, as a new software engineer, where do I start from? How do I, start having a database set up on my computer? The first thing you have to do is you have to download this software from this link. I'll put it in the description in below. So basically, you need to download this and actually install it on your computer. There are different versions. There's an option of you actually like storing your information in the cloud, where you have the database in the cloud, which is this one on Azure. Azure is an actual cloud platform, but for this demo, I'm gonna be focusing on the one you can install on your computer. So there are two different types you can see here, which is the developer version, and this is the express version. So express version is actually the lightweight one. It's actually the basic one. If you don't want to like have the full featured edition on your computer, you might actually just go with the express one. But I have this one installed already on my computer. You just have to download this, and that will take you through the journey. There's a wizard you have to follow that actually takes you through the journey of actually being able to install and make sure that actual SQL Server is working correctly on your computer. And after you've installed this, the next thing you have to install is an IDE to be able to interact with this server, because this is actually just the server. It doesn't really have nice interface, because the only way you can connect to it once you've installed it is by the command line. So you can open your terminal and start interacting with it, but it's a little bit difficult if you want to do rapid development and you want to be quick. Basically, you want to be able to see more information, because with the command line you have to always type in the command as to what you want to see. But with the IDE, which is this actually gives you much more. You can even troubleshoot, you can go through what's going on with your database. And the actual language that we use to communicate with the database is called SQL. So SQL is actually a structured query language. So let's just go and say SQL on Google. Let's just remove that and just say SQL on Google, and let's just see what it says there. So you can see, let's go into Wikipedia, because Wikipedia will tell us, like just the things we need to know. And you can see the structured query language, and this tells you like this is the language you need to know if you want to interact with the database. We have different types of database out there, but this is actually the language I know that you can use to interact with the database. And in this video we're going to be looking at some of the basic queries you can write that you can use to interact with the database. So we can look at how to create a database, how to delete the database, how to create a simple table, how to create a stored proc. We can actually look at all that. So let's just go back to this where we were. So once you have the SQL Server installed, you just have to make sure that you install this as well. And also I just want to say that this actually works on, you can install the SQL Server on Windows, you can install it on Linux. You can see there, you can on Linux or Mac. So if you want to install it on like a Linux or Mac, there's a technology you have to use which is called Docker. You can use a Docker image. We'll get into that in my later video as to what Docker is. But if you're if you're brave enough, you can start looking into it yourself. But there is actually an installation guide here as to how you can get it running on your different operating system. Another thing I want to point out is that you can see here that this is actually the system requirement for you to be able to have this running. So you need at least 2 gig memory, you need that file system, you need the disk space, and also your processor speed and all that. So it gives you like a basic information of what it is needed for Linux. So basically these are just more information. You can read up on this, you can go on this link. I'll make sure I put it in the description below. And so once you've installed the SQL Server, you've installed the Management Studio. So this is what it looks like. And when you start it up, and as you can see, it gives you like the server type, which is a database engine. There are other types of services you can have here. This depends on how you've installed your SQL Server, because if you actually, as part of that installation for SQL Server, if you actually said you want analysis, reporting and all that, then you would have all these services installed as part of your SQL Server. But the focus is actually on the database engine, and the server name is most likely to be your computer name, because that is when you install it on your computer, that is what it picks up. But there are cases where it could be like a URL. It can be a URL or like a domain name or something. This could be, it could be even an IP number, IP address. It could be that. But also on top of this, you have to see that there is actually an authentication, which is telling us that you can actually connect to this either by Windows authentication or by SQL Server authentication or by Azure Active Directory. In this video, I'm just going to be touching on this too, which is your Windows authentication and SQL Server authentication. With the Windows authentication, this is just saying that it's going to use your Windows credentials, what you use in logging in into your Windows computer. That is the same user that is going to use. So just bear that in mind. So when you click on that, it's going to use that same username and password using for logging in into this computer, and that is it. And for SQL Server authentication, this is you actually creating a login user that you want to use to connect to your database instance. So I've created a test user. I'm going to show you again how I created, how I did this. So I'm just going to connect to this for now with SQL Server authentication user. So when I click on connect, you can see there that it actually connected me to that actual SQL Server instance, which is what I have currently on my machine that I've installed. And Another thing you can also do is you can actually check on about and see what type of management studio are you running. So you can see that this is the management studio I'm running, which is that one. And it gives me more information as to the objects, the analysis, data, and all that. But and also even the operating system I'm using, which is Windows 10. So basically you can see it has different folders here, and if you expand you can see there are different types of configurations or different types of components that is actually on here. And one of the major places that you want to you'll be spending most of your time is this database. For security, you might actually have to come here. Let's say for instance this actual database instance is on a separate server on a different computer that everyone actually remotely connects into it. Then you want to set up different users, in this case now I set up a user because I have other users on it. So if I right click on, so for you to create a new user that you want them to access this instance, you just have to right click on there and click on login. And by the way, you can also use the SQL script to do that, but this is actually just another way of you being able to do to interact with your server by using the UI. So, and what you can do is you can give this user a name. So for instance I can say code with Femi, right? I can use that as my user. Let me just copy that username. And then I don't want to use Windows authentication because this actual user is not a user on my computer. It's actually just some user I want to use to connect to this database. So I give it a name, and then I can actually give it a password. And once I give it a password, I can choose to enforce password policy, which is me saying that if I uncheck this, you can see that is disabled. If I check it, that means that you want that password to always expire and you want to enforce the users to always change their password. Like, so in this case now, when you give, let's say you give the username and password to someone, when they are on their next login, they have to change their password. So that's just what it means. But I'm just going to turn this off. And then you have a server role. Server role is more like you want to grant access privileges to a user for this instance. So whatever user, so I will indulge you to actually go and read up on these different types of user. I won't say much about this. Maybe later in the videos that we go on with, then I can actually expand on it. But for these are just different admin that they can do things within this space. So let's say for instance the security admin would actually be able to do anything that is related to security. That's you know what I mean. So basically you just have to be sure what kind of permission you're granting to your user. Sysadmin is one valid user that can do anything on your databases and all that. So you just have to read up on this different roles and know what kind of user your assets you're giving to your user. But for this example, for this demo, I'm just going to use a sysadmin because that has more rights to do a lot of things in this on this instance. So I'm giving it that. And then you have a case where you have user mapping. User mapping is more like, in a way, if you want to give like roles, we want to give roles to a specific user for a specific database. So let's say for instance I want this user to be a read, to just be able to read this. Then I can give it just a data reader, and maybe on this database, which is code 4, I can say this actual user is the owner of this database. You can see there. But for this demo, I'm not gonna really I'm just gonna uncheck that because this actual role I've given to this user can actually operate on these different databases. And we have other ones that are not really that you can also look at. But the one I actually focus more on the status. You can grant access or you can deny access or you can disable the login for this user. But once you click on OK, then this user is actually going to be created on there. And as you can see, it's actually in there now, right there. So that's just the user now. And if I disconnect from this, I can connect and say, I want to connect now with code with Femi, right? and then I give it my password, and then once I connect, you can see I can still log in into this. So basically, this actually allows you to be able to log in into the database instance, and that is just how you can create different logins to access the database. That's so, as you can see there, I've connected to this SQL instance using that user. You can see code with Femi in that tooltip, and if I expand security logins, you can see that the user actually exists now. And I can choose to disable this user if I feel like I don't want this user to have access to this anymore. And let's just try that quickly. I'll disconnect this, connect to that, and then what I want to do is I'll switch back to the other user, which is test, and then I can connect. And then if I go back to security logins, and then I go there and right click and just click on properties, it shows me the information about this user. I can go there and say I want to deny access, to this. I don't want this actual user to connect anymore. You can see it has a red mark on it now to tell me that this user has been disabled. So if I disconnect and I try to connect using that same code with Femi, guess what's going to happen? You can see there, login failed for code with Femi, account is disabled. So this is how you actually can control your access to your database, which is the first thing I just want to touch on before we move on. So let's just go back to our test. So then let's create a new database and call it code 6. Code 6, and then basically you can choose to play around with this with this different settings based on what you want. But for this demo, I'm just going to keep it as default, and then I'm just going to click on OK. I can see that I've got a database now. So this is where I want us to focus more on, which is basically you have a database now. So what do? You might be wondering, like, okay, fine. Like you were talking about SQL, like the language, like to interact with the SQL Server. Why are you not using that? Okay, I'm sorry, but I'm just showing you that you can also, whatever I'm doing now through this interface, through this IDE, can be used, can be done through the SQL, like your SQL script. So let's just delete this. And then let's create the database using the SQL, like the SQL language. And you can see I have what I did was I just said new query. So new query tells me, okay, what do you want to do? Like this is like a place, this is like your environment where you can now develop your scripts to actually do things. So the first thing you want to do is you want to create a database, right? Let's create a new database and call it, let's just say create database, and let's call this actually my first database, right? And what you want to do is you want to click on execute there, or you can use F5. So I'm just going to use F5, and you can see the commands completed successfully. You just want to refresh this, and when you refresh this, what do you see there? My first database. Can you see that? And it's still gonna give you the same thing. Like if I say, okay, for instance, code 6, execute, and I refresh this, what do you get? You get code 6. You can see that this is actually like, nice. You can actually start creating your database. The next thing you want to do is you want to create your table, right? So let's create a table with a script. So first thing you have to know is that you have to be sure what database are you using. There are two ways of doing this. You can come here and you use this to switch to the database you want to run your query against. So if I say code 6, that means whatever query I'm writing here is going to be be executed against this database. So always bear that in mind. Another way you can do this is by saying use and then the name of the database. So in this case, we want to use my first database, right? And then you just say go, just to say that you want the following, the next script to actually like execute it against that database. So what we want to do now is want to create our first table. So let's say create table, and just call it my first table, right? And then in there, always remember, like your table is actually where you store the information I'm talking about. So your database can contain a lot of tables, like one to many tables, and each of these tables represent whatever data you want to actually store in there. So let's just even change this to something else and call this a person, Okay, person would have information. So the first thing you want to put in that person table is actually an ID, like a unique identifier, to be able to identify each record, so that each record can be unique when you need to actually pull that information out. So the first thing you want to do is have a unique identifier. And how do you do that? You just have to make sure you give it a name. So we'll call this person ID. And then what type of ID it is? Is it an integer? It is we have different data types, when it comes to different, because this is actually a field in this table. And that field where you want to store information, you want to say that, okay, for that actual field, I want it to be an integer. Let's just use int, which means that data type is integer. And then the next thing you want to do is you want to say, to specify that this is actually a primary key. It's actually a primary key, and it's actually an identity field, which means that it would actually increment upon insertion. It will increment from, it's going to start from 1 and then increment up like that as you insert into that table. The next thing you want to do is what do you think an attribute of a person would be? Let's say first name. So first name is one of it, first name, and then we can use nvarchar, which is actually like a string. Like this takes anything. It could take a number, it could take characters, symbols, it can take alphabets, it could take anything. And then in the bracket there, you want to specify what is the length. So let's say a first name must just be 50, at most 50 character length. And then you want to also specify, is this actual field going to be supplied by whoever is inserting or not? Like, is it required or not? Let's say it's required, so we say not null, right? So this means that you cannot insert into this person table without you not having a first name at least. So the next thing we want to say is middle name, right? So middle name, we can also use the same same flow, which is nvarchar, and in there we can say 50 as well. But for this one, like, it's not everyone that has a middle name, so we can say this one could be null, we don't mind. And then you have your surname, right? Or let's say last name. Actually, I think last name sounds better. And then we say this is also nvarchar, and then we make this 50 as well, and say this is also not null. You need to have a surname at least to be able to insert into this DB. So this is just, let's just keep this simple. This is just basic. So you can actually execute this script now, and let's see what happens. So that script has been executed, right? And if you go, you can see it's my first database. That's what we use. So let's collapse this one, and then let's go to this table. What can you see there? You can see now that there is actually a new table called person, right? If you expand it, you can see it has columns, which are the fields I mentioned. And in there, you can see you have an ID, which is your person ID, that actually tells you that that record is unique. And then you have your first name, middle name, and last name, right? So this is actually a simple table, and this is what the representation looks like. So there are two ways. Like I said, you can use the UI to select. You can see it's still empty, right? And you might be wondering, like, okay, how do I insert? How do I get information into this table? So it's also like using SQL queries. But before we go further, I just want to show you something. So basically, we created it on my first database, but check here, there's nothing here. There's nothing actually here. So let's change this to code 6 so you can see what I mean. So now you're saying use code 6 and then run this there. Guess what is going to happen when I do that? Now it's going to run that same query in here, not there anymore, because I've changed that to say use this database now, which is code 6. Let's refresh this and see what happens. Can you see that? So this is just me showing you, like, how to set up. So you've set up your first database, you've set up your first table, which is a person, and then the next thing you want to do is you want to insert record into that table, right? So let's just use code 6 and say we're still using code 6. Let's say insert into person, right? And then what you want to do is you want to specify the columns or the fields you want to actually insert the data into. So what are the columns we have here? Let's expand this and know what columns. So remember, like I said previously, that for the actual person ID, you don't need to insert that. That will increment when you insert the other data, because it's actually a primary key. This is auto-generated by the database by itself, so you don't need to worry about this. So all you need to do is just say, specify the ones you want to insert. So it's first name, right? So let's say first name. I want to insert first name. I want to insert middle name for now, and I also want to insert this last name, right? And then you want to say these are the values of those columns or those fields. So yeah, I can say Femi. Let's say Femi is my first name, and then let's say my second name is my middle name is let's use Michael, and then my last name is Otusonya. That's my name, right? Okay. Basically, the reason why it's complaining is because the IntelliSense hasn't picked that up, that this is actually already created. It happens sometimes where you just see red for some reason, but that doesn't mean this query is not going to work. Okay. So let's just select this so you can see the table is actually blank currently. This is code 6, this is DB person. There's nothing there in the table. So if I go back to this query and actually say execute, you can see one row affected, right? One row affected. Let's go and select this. Sorry, let's run this. What do you see? You have a first person with number 1 and like that. So that is how you create. So I can actually even go as far as saying, okay, I've inserted one, I want to insert more. So let's insert more. And for this one, I'm going to say YouTube. Let's just call this YouTube. And then let's remove this. Let's make this null, right? We don't even want this, because I don't want to insert this. I just want to insert the first name. We're gonna take this out because we've inserted that already. And then I'm just gonna say users, right? YouTube users. That is your first name as your last name, right? We execute that. You see it affected it. And then if you go, so you can see here, I'm actually using the actual the UI to actually just use the options they give me, which is select. So in this case, I don't want to do that. I want to do it right here. So basically I can do this and say select list from person. And what it's going to do is it's going to select everything for me. You can see there that now this is null. Remember what I said, this is actually not required, so you don't have to add that. And then you can see you can see there's more records coming in. But this is the information now. This is your database. You have information going into your database. This is amazing. It is amazing. So that is just how you actually insert. And then you can also do things like delete. You can delete, you can do a lot of things. You can say you can use the where condition to say where, you know, where person dot or you can even, and there are cases where you want to use alias. You can actually use alias here to say you want to use an alias for that table name. If it's too long, there are cases where the table name is too long, you can use an alias and just say prs dot first name is equals to Femi. What do you think this is going to bring back? Run it. There, tells you Femi. Let's change this to YouTube. What do you think is gonna bring back? YouTube. So like there's a lot of queries out there. I'm gonna put a link down below that you can also use to start playing around, you know, inserting things into your table, into your DB, and, you know, start doing amazing things. And in the next video, what we're gonna do is we're gonna connect this database code 6 to that application that I showed you in my previous video, which is on IDE, and we're gonna see how those things are gonna interact with each other. But yeah, this is just it actually. I hope I was able to add value to you guys, and I hope you have a wonderful time, and I hope to see you next time. Keep well. Cheers.